Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Josh Bennett with College Funding Hero. Welcome to the channel where we help you save money on the cost of college. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. We provide a lot of information that can help you drop that sticker price. In this video, we're going to talk about how your home equity affects your ability to get financial aid. Depending on what college you're applying for, the equity that you have accumulated in your home as parents can have a big impact on your child's ability to get financial aid when they go to school. So to first understand how it affects financial aid, first we kind of have to start back with the basics. So what is home equity in the definition of how college looks at it? So home equity is your value of your home minus any loans that you have out on it. So like most people have to get mortgages when they buy their house. So say your home is worth $500,000, you have a $400,000 mortgage. That means you have $100,000 in equity in your home currently. So that $100,000 is what ultimately will factor against you. So that's kind of when we talk about home equity, and that's the number we're talking about, is the difference between what your home is valued at today minus what you have outstanding in terms of loans. And the value of your home only really affects your ability to get what's called need-based aid. So when we talk about financial aid, and I'll link a video below that goes more into depth into what this is, but there's need-based aid, which basically is purely based on the financial need of the family, which is the cost of attendance of the college minus the family's ability to pay as determined by either the FAFSA or the CSS Profile. So the FAFSA form is the free application for federal student aid, and the CSS Profile, these are the two different forms that you'll basically fill out in order to get any financial aid from schools, at least from the institutional level of the schools. So the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, is basically the form that most public schools use, or most state-sponsored schools use, to determine what your financial need-based aid is. CSS Profile is used by about 400 private schools, or at least kind of generalizing across the board in terms of private versus public, but those are typically the two different forms you'll need to fill out. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because the FAFSA does not look at home equity as part of the equation. So a lot of schools out there that utilize the FAFSA don't take home equity into account. So those schools, you don't even need to worry about this video. You can kind of just skip on through. But where it comes into effect is if you're applying to a school that requires the CSS Profile. The CSS Profile requires a lot more information on the profile, just because, frankly, private schools tend to be a little bit more generous. And when they're a little bit more generous, they require a little bit more information and a little bit nosier before they'll give you that information or give you that money. So they require a lot more information. So on there, you'll have to declare what your home equity is. And when it comes to the CSS Profile, how that's calculated from colleges is they basically expect you to be able to pay about 5% of your home equity, which why they factor that in, I don't know. But, unfortunately, that's just the way colleges look at it. They sort of assume that your home equity can be spent for college, even though that would require you selling your home and things like that, which don't necessarily make sense. And it does, kind of penalize people that live in higher cost of living areas like, say, New York or California, where houses are just more expensive. So if your house is more expensive, just by nature of where you live, that's going to count more heavily against you. So that's where considering some state schools or other alternatives that don't necessarily look at CSS Profile may end up playing better in your favor. But so say you have $100,000 of home equity, the college is going to assume that you can pay about $5,000. So that's kind of where that factors in. So, however, that being said, some schools that even use the CSS Profile won't necessarily look at the home equity within the application. Some will set a cap on how much home equity they look at, and then some will basically look at all of it. So moral of the story with all this is there are only a select couple schools that will look at the full home equity value, and a lot of those schools tend to be on the East Coast, but not necessarily. So it's one of those things that you definitely want to look at and do your homework in terms of what schools are looking at your full home equity value. And if one of those schools that is on your list, you have a lot of home equity, it may be worth looking at what the net price of that school is going to be and determining, is it worth even applying here because I can't afford it just because of my home equity. And There are, a lot of things you can do to kind of play around with that, such as, take out like cash out refis. Not necessarily advising that by any means, just because, debt can come with its own different things. And plus then you have a cash asset that can then be used. But moral of the story is really when it comes to home equity, your best thing is going to be understanding what schools look at home equity, which schools cap home equity, which schools completely ignore it. And if you have a ton of home equity that could really impact your chances of getting, needed financial need aid, then you may want to consider schools that don't necessarily look at home aid or home equity at all. Because depending on the school, it can have a marked impact on your ability to get need-based aid. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, just because it helps us with the YouTube algorithm and helps us provide value to more families across the board. So yeah, hit that like button, leave us a comment if you have any questions. Otherwise, make sure you subscribe, so we'll see you next time. Cheers.